like I'm realizing that why is becoming more refined in this space for me is, can we provide at least one moment that they talk about in years to come? Doesn't have to be like fireworks on every corner of the house, but can we generate at least one moment that they find themselves talking about in 5 years? So that feels like something that helps direct a lot of the rest of the experience for what I'm trying to do. So.
Welcome to the Hassle-Free RE Podcast, a real estate podcast where we bring you stories, education, and tips for investors and real estate enthusiasts. If you're interested in investing in real estate or just want to keep a pulse on what's happening in the market, then this podcast is for you. Thanks so much for listening and tuning in. If you enjoy our show, please make sure to subscribe and give us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate it. Hello, and welcome to the Hassle-Free RE Podcast. I am your host, Dave Menapace.
And I'm your co-host, Kim Menapace. I was going to say Dave Menapace.
All right. Between Kim and I, you have Kim and Dave. We're not saying who's who. And with that, today we have a very special guest. His name is Anson Roberts. And so Anson, we actually met when we were in Miami at the short-term rental wealth conference retreat. Anson is a fantastic dude. He lives out in Denver, Colorado. He's done a whole bunch of different real estate investing, from flips to more recently, or still does flips, but also very involved in the short-term rental space. He's in our short-term rental secrets mastermind, and he just has a really fun story, and someone that we got along with very, very well. And we were fortunate enough to go out to dinner with him and a few other couples. So with that, today, we're going to go through Anson's story. And before we get too deep and I just sort of finish up the podcast, Anson, why don't you introduce yourself and we'll take it from the beginning.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys. As you said, my name is Anson. I'm currently based out of Denver, originally from beautiful Chucktown, Charleston, South Carolina. And also spent a good while living in Texas. And so I am married, and I've got two amazing kiddos, 5 and 8. And actually, they just left. I'm in the process of launching a property down here in the Gulf in Texas, an area called Crystal Beach. So they actually just departed this morning. So they were able, we've been talking about this project for quite a few months. So it was fun to have them in the weeds of it with me for a few days. So, but yeah, like you said, engaged in a few different areas in the real estate space. Done a mix of flips over the past few years. I've done some commercial real estate with a previous business in the automotive sector. And then the short-term rental space is getting the bulk of my attention these days. I'm loving it.
That is awesome. I didn't know that you lived in South Carolina. That's pretty cool. So you bounced around a little bit. Why don't we rewind just a little bit? Why don't you tell us what first got you into short-term rentals and maybe what that whole process looked like?
Yeah. So my initial dipping of the toes in these waters started actually about 5 years ago. And it started whenever my second kiddo was on his way. He's 5 now. His name is Wilder, and his name is very appropriate. And we were needing to actually find a larger home. And so I was starting to attend some real estate meetups in Colorado. Ended up meeting someone at one of these meetups who mentioned that they had a property in Denver with a carriage house, and my ears perked up pretty quickly. And so I went and looked at it that day, and it was actually this incredibly dilapidated hoarder situation. But it had this 100-year-old beautiful brick home with a carriage house out back. And it was in an area that at that point was a little bit outside of our price point for being able to service, but we had never had any experience in the short-term rental space, but the wheel started to turn there. And so we began operating that exclusively through Airbnb at that point. And it just has been a nice source of additional income over the past 5 years. And it's interesting. I have at a few points considered diving deeper into the STR space. Even, I don't know, it's probably 4 or 5 years ago. I actually did it. This was before I think it was really blown up in the short-term rental universe.
Right.
But I did a exploratory trip with a couple of friends to Destin, just out of curiosity, and was like, I don't know about this space. And we didn't pull the trigger on anything. And and I remember even a few years back following some of the guys like Bill Faith or short-term shop in some of these places and wondering how legitimate some of these numbers were. And then life just kind of moved along. And then it wasn't until this past year that decided that I didn't actually want to build a real business in the flip space. I've been flipping homes, but flipping a house is more like a project. There's a kind of a clearly defined timeline. You have subs, you don't necessarily have in-house staff, and you can kind of like stop a project and you move on to the next, or you pause. There's not really much tying you to much of anything.
Right.
But I decided that it was time for me again to begin building something. And the short-term rental space, because the exposure to the flipping side, because of the exposure to having this back carriage house operating for a while, it seemed like, man, maybe unintentionally the skill sets have kind of aligned for something to be built here. And so that's where the bulk of my focus is going.
Nice. What so the carriage house was the first, correct? That was, you moved there. What was it like? And this was 2018 ish.
Yeah, 17 to 18, somewhere in that. Yeah, I think into 17 maybe.
Nice. We were a couple of years later. We were 2019, but when Kim and I launched our approach to it is much different than when we launched another one several years later. What did you learn from that experience, from launching to having people on your property to managing guests? Like, what was that all like?
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind is our carriage house has done really well. Like, the response and feedback from guests over the past years has been overwhelmingly glowing. And I think a big aspect of that has been the personal touch that has been given to that space and to the interaction with guests. And it's not that we're like making them dinner each night, but it is highly personalized. And it feels like we found a pretty nice balance of giving a guest their space, but making them feel really cared for. And I think that in a space where at times it can be viewed as a passive investment or like set it and forget it, that a little bit of personalized interaction, a little bit of thoughtfulness when it comes to a handwritten note, things like that, it just not only is it effective, but it's like it brings joy to the process for me, to actually feel like you're helping to provide an experience that stands out in someone's mind and that they want to tell other people about because they were cared for in a way they're not cared for in other spaces. And so now becomes the interesting process of how do you scale something that feels unscalable, right? Which I think is I don't know, I think that's where the juice is in a lot of successful businesses, is how do you scale what feels unscalable. So that's where my wheels are still currently turning, in the midst of
Right.
I think especially having it on your premise, so you can write those handwritten notes per guest. We're an hour and a half away from our closest property. And so I have heard of other folks who are really big in the short-term rental space saying, oh, I like to write a personal note for every guest. And I think if someone booked last minute, how can we do that? If people book 6 months out, there's a little bit more of a chance of that. So that's very cool that you have that and are trying to have that be your North Star. How do I create that really nice personal touch experience, even if I have one several states away now, as the one you're actually recording this podcast in.
Exactly. I mean, just as like a recent story, we had a guest stay there who she had to cut her trip short because her dog, who's older, had some medical emergency, and so she left the space a couple days early. And this was actually my wife's idea, but we ended up sending her, like, whatever, $15 or something, sending her a little package with some like pet CBD oil and a few things like that. And again, is it likely that we may have a client forever because of that? It's possible, but it also just feels good to like see the human, right, and show up in a small way. I've had a couple of experiences like that in places that I've stayed over the years, and I still talk about it, and so that starts to come into part of, like, I'm realizing that why is becoming more refined in this space for me. Is, can we provide at least one moment that they talk about in years to come? Doesn't have to be like fireworks on every corner of the house, but can we generate at least one moment that they find themselves talking about in 5 years? So that feels like something that helps direct a lot of the rest of the experience for what I'm trying to do. So
That is an awesome why. And I think it, so we've done some investing out of state. We've done, we went hard in the long distance spur strategy thing, which was cool. It was really neat. But providing somebody with a house to just live in is a lot different than providing a vacation home and an opportunity for experiences to happen. And I think Kim and I would both agree. I mean, we've had at least one group that's gotten engaged in one of our houses in this tiny kitchen, which was kind of funny, but it was also really awesome. We hear through a lot of the different reviews and feedback, all these first times that happen for people. And to your point, usually it's a lot longer than 5 years. It's for the rest of their life that they remember that. And that is a super fulfilling thing. That is so fulfilling for us. It's a big why for us. And you don't get that with flips. You don't get that with long-term rentals. You don't get that with commercial. So those are much more transactional approaches to in very different disciplines within real estate. So totally agree on that. Totally
well, I think
agree.
that it can change the relationship to things that come up along the way that are inevitable in managing and hosting other human beings that are just these aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. Like, they're stories, and they have their quirks and their beautiful elements and their challenges. And so if the more that I'm able to focus on the proactive, creative element of, like, what are we actually putting out to the world that's interesting, versus what is the occupancy rate, and that, like, not that that's not relevant, but if I only focus on that whenever a guest brings up something or has a concern, then it's just a problem to my process, versus this is actually central to what we're doing. And so I think it changes the framing of some of the daily kind of experiences that come up as being opportunities versus problems. And I feel like I've experienced both, but I'm seeing the relevance of keeping that North Star component of, why are we doing this? And is it just occupancy? Is it just revenue? Well, then people can become a problem, right? versus integral. So yeah, that's just something I've begun to notice. And that's actually, I feel like, a little bit of a newer, like, it's been present, but the awareness of it, and then like the dialing into that component specifically, feels a little bit newer actually in my process. So
Very cool. So and that is a really, really good way. I think I'm going to adopt that, because there are hard days, around Christmas when everyone was losing power, at least at the houses we manage. It can be hard to tap into that why sometimes, but there were some really nice things that came out of it that, people still enjoyed their stay, and, it's the holiday. But yeah, tapping into that. And
yeah.
Anson, do you do Do you do real estate full time these days?
Yeah. Yeah. So I transitioned out of the automotive business that I had for about a decade and it built up. So that was towards the beginning of COVID. I started flipping houses, and I had done some projects with other real estate related transactions, either the home that I mentioned that I'm still in, or some commercial properties for that previous business, but decided to move into the flipping space. And then over the past 6, 8 months, maybe 6 months, started that transition from flipping being the primary to the STR space being primary. And then the intention is I just do flips whenever either the deal is just too good to pass up, or it's a really interesting project that makes money and I just like it. So that's the hope on that front.
Nice. So what does a day look like for you? I mean, maybe actually let me, so between the carriage house and today with you in Texas working on this house, which we'll get to in a little bit, what has the journey been over that period? So you're doing real estate full time, kind of starting at the beginning of COVID with doing flips. On the short-term rental space, you have the carriage house. What has been your progression over the last few years since then as it relates to STRs?
Yeah. So it honestly, a big moment for me was joining Mike Sjogren's mastermind that y'all have hopped into.
Yeah.
That was a moment where I was like, okay, I'm going to give this a serious go. Before that, I was definitely kicking the tires for a handful of months. And so from there, initially it was, okay, can I acquire a couple of larger properties, potentially with partners, and have some consistent income from those, as well as some equity play long term. And then I will continue flipping. And then in the midst of that, the kind of project that made sense with the partner that I was working with, it needed to be a larger project just for it to make sense for both of us to be involved.
Right.
And so then as I was in, this is the house that I'm currently doing this interview from, because of the nature of this property, which is it's just a large property, and there's a lot of layers to it. I found myself beginning to need to build out various aspects of the business that I don't think I was anticipating initially. I thought I was hopping into a mastermind to, get a couple of like tips and tricks for more efficiently. And next thing you know, I'm like, have this whole tech stack rolling and looking at VAs and so, a few months back, I was like, geez, there's kind of a business here that's growing, and somewhat intentionally at first. And so then it became, okay, if I'm going to do this, I might as well do it, and not view this as a side project. But there was also a pretty deep internal process with this for me too, that coming out of the previous business in the automotive space, there was some just real challenges that I faced with that were just hard, like mentally, emotionally, relationally. And I found myself in the place of not knowing if I ever wanted to actually build a business again. I didn't know if I ever wanted to even remotely consider having an employee again.
Right.
And that's why, in hindsight, I realized how helpful doing flips for a period of time was. It was like a break for me. And then it wasn't until it was just a couple months ago where, for the first time in actually quite a few years, there was observed just this little tiny flicker of a flame of like, oh man, I think I might be ready to buckle up again and like build something. So then kind of fast forward, I was like, okay, we're going to do this. And so started putting the word out there from a co-host standpoint, and brought on a handful of doors on that front through just connections that I already had. And so the process from there has been, building out the back end SOPs, the procedures of what makes my company tick. A few weeks into the training of our first VA, and using the existing co-hosting properties as the kind of testing ground for that. They're all like kind of the beta, right?
Right.
It's as for what I'm trying to build, and putting in the systems in place that support a much larger operation than where I'm currently at, so that as I put the name out there more and potentially even begin to run some targeted ads for building the co-host side of stuff, that the systems are in place to handle that progression in a really fluid manner. And so like hiring before I need to, putting procedures in place that feel silly at this point.
No, but you're right.
And yeah, so that's kind of the progression on where things started and where they're at currently.
There's two directions I want to go in here. I think that Dave and I feel some parallels in our experience, where when you have one property or vacation home that you're running yourself, it's easy to be more casual and less intentional with it. Is its own business. It has its own expenses, its income, its operating expenses, its procedures with us, even if it's just us handling guest communication. And we've ping-ponged back and forth with who's the lead on that. I think we're seeing the same thing with when you start to take this seriously and be more intentional with it as a business. What is your brand? What is the name of your company? What's your logo? What's your insurance? What's your, legal documents you need for your partnership, et cetera? Who's on your team, both the vendors that aren't officially employees of you, but you consider partners in this. So I think that yes, I said parallel paths there. It is. And I'm sure there's a lot you can draw for good of your experience from running an auto business. For us, Dave and I have dabbled in other businesses. We had a co-working space, a more boutique WeWork a couple of years ago. And I said it was the best college education course I ever took, because it was about the investment for each of us was about the cost of a college education course. And I said, I learned so much in those several months, and paying that money for the space we rented and our logo and learning how to run a website. And, now we're trying to outsource those types of things, but it's probably been invaluable. And hopefully you can extract some of the good pieces from the auto business to try to apply it here as you're really hitting the gas pedal this year. And then the second point I was going to make I wanted to just understand the lay of the land of where you have how many properties you have personally co-hosting, and then where they are, just so we can have an understanding of where you're starting 2023 at.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll share the kind of name of the operation as well. So the company that I'm building is called Tailored Stays, and the name, addressing that for just a moment, the name felt right in some odd and not fully understood way whenever I went down the route of how to brand this thing. And it's interesting to feel the development of, like, I really believe in it. Like, the name really captures something that feels really resonant for me at a deep level. And so the way that's begun to develop is, so we had the Carriage House there in Denver. And then there are 3 with about to be 4 in Colorado, others in Colorado. So there's a couple in Denver. There's one that's like a cabin that's just up I-70 that heads into the mountains there. It's like the highway you take to get to Vail and Breck and all those areas. And then there's a condo that we have in Keystone that's kind of a ski in, ski out style condo. And then this project here in Crystal Beach, Texas, that closed on back in September. And this is a whole different animal. The other properties feel like what I had in my mind of what it would look like to manage an Airbnb. This is launching its own business. It's just there's very there's a level of complexity and very layered nature to this project that I'm happy to talk more about too. But I don't know if y'all have experienced this, but I think that most entrepreneurs have to consciously or unconsciously work with being naive to some extent. And I
Yeah.
don't know how much of it I do willfully or unconsciously, but it's, you know, I've joked about it with my wife too, where like after childbirth, like you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I ever do this again, until like 2 years later, all of a sudden you're having another kid.
Right.
And it's similar like in business at times, where, yeah, I things that I'm like, oh my gosh, this is insane. I also very well, if I thought about it, it's not surprising, but
Right.
it was like this willful ignorance. And I think it's the only way that at times we take on what we're going to take on. Because if we knew everything it would cost, I don't know, at least for me, I think I would bow out at times before I even,
Yeah.
so, but yeah, so, and I'm happy to, like I said, talk more about this, but there's also, a property that looks like it's going to materialize in Panama City Beach, Florida, and then
Nice.
potentially a large property for a family member in the upstate of South Carolina. That's another like, yeah, that'll be a larger kind of project as well. But those are looking like they're materializing, but aren't done deals as of today.
One thing, so we're definitely going to talk about the Crystal Beach property in just a little bit because I have so many of my own questions. But what I want to do before that is go back to the investment you made in joining the mastermind because, you know, a lot of people, I get this a lot as a realtor. People approach me and they say, I have 50 to $100,000, or maybe they have more, but they have never managed a short term rental. They've never owned a short term rental. And all of a sudden they approach me and they want to buy two or three. And they're young. They got kids. They got jobs that they care deeply about keeping. They have all these things. And they have one thing they don't have is any education on the industry, or they also don't really have any support. Maybe they have spousal support, you know, or both folks in the relationship want to do it together, but they don't really have a support network of friends or a family, and it's hard, right? And so, more and more recently, when people now approach me with that, my response is more about getting education. At least, even if your plan is only to have one, if you want to run it like a business so it doesn't totally suck your heart out, which can happen for some people depending on how they're wired. Some people love it and it's very hands-on and it's cool and they're into it. But I'm starting to realize, you know, an investment of 5, 10, 20 grand into a mastermind where you have all this support allows you, and education allows you to learn how to do things the right way, and then sometimes create side businesses off of it, which could be primary businesses like co-hosting, you know, just things like that. Same. Before the first short-term rental wealth conference in June, I never had co-hosting on my experience, on my mind. If anything, it was the opposite. I was sort of like, how do I offload this so I can just be a buyer, right? And now obviously, if for anyone that's listened to this and seen our YouTube channel, it's the opposite of that. But so I think it's really awesome that, you know, you joined that mastermind, you got all this education, you got all the support, and look at all these really cool opportunities that are developing for you, that maybe you did have a plan for that, or maybe you didn't, but I'm sure things are going a lot smoother than if you didn't join the mastermind and then you sort of saw on Instagram, oh, I could try co-hosting, and just start taking swings at it. You know what I mean?
For sure. Part of my process with that too was a pretty decent level of self-inflicted humility I needed to swallow.
Yeah.
um, and looking around and seeing people that are performing at a high level
Yeah.
and letting go of the idea that I'm inherently just good enough and I should be able to do what they're doing. And
Right.
without being willing to look at what they did to get there. And there's a lot, and you're going to have the anomalies that just naturally fly without any support. But I came to see that across a lot of industries, a lot of the people that I seem to respect a lot have invested heavily in masterminds, some of these in-depth transformative experiences, different kinds of coaching, mentorship. And so part of it was like, am I really so awesome that I don't need that? And I came
Right.
to a very clear, no, I'm not that awesome. And so
You are awesome. You are awesome. You're even
there's
more
something
awesome. We'll
there.
put it that way.
So,
You're even more awesome.
but yeah, so I think that there was a very willful and intentional kind of humbling process that was needed for me in that.
Yeah.
And it's been really valuable. And but I also, man, and honestly, it was like a month or two into that mastermind, even though I had paid the money, I very seriously considered bowing out and just being like, I'm done. And it was just because I was realizing what it was bringing up in me from a desire, vision, goal standpoint, and what I would need to do. Like I realized that I was able to observe the delta between where I was at and the things I was desiring in a way that I had never seen before. And it scared I don't know what the language parameters are on
S
this,
words are cool.
but it scared
S
the
words
shit
are
out of
cool.
me. Like,
Yeah.
and it scared me because I was like, I don't know if I can show up and actually do the things that I say I want to do. And now I have people around me that are like, if I say this shit, there's some level of accountability.
Right.
And it actually, there was a few weeks that was like really, really hard internally for me. And I like took a break from showing up to calls, and I was very close to tapping out. But then, coming back to the like larger why stuff, I'm like, is this really who you are going to be? Like, you're putting a flag and you're saying, this is the man you are. Whenever you look at your kids, this is the dad you like. And I was like, gosh, yeah, we're not going that way. So anyways, kind of a tangent there, but beyond just learning tips and tricks on how to operate an Airbnb well, there was some deep heart stuff there, like both mentally and emotionally for me as well. That's become it's actually grown aspects of me I did not anticipate growing in the midst of joining into something like that. So
It's very cool. Anson, can you remind me, when did you
That's so
join the
cool.
mastermind?
it was like late summer, late summer sometime.
Okay, so just before we went to the Miami conference, I'll never forget. So we went to dinner with Bill Faith, and I remember you were one of the 7 of us that joined Bill at that dinner. And I'll never forget when you're talking to one of the other folks that was at the dinner with us, who had just had a big commercial property go under contract and wasn't sure exactly what he was going to use with it, and was a little psyched out by the appraisal value of that. And I remember you saying, just extra zeros. What are you stressing about, man? And I think that's so cool. And I think that mindset shift, it's Dave and I are not there yet. We aren't buying $1 million properties for ourselves or partnering on these big houses or complexes that can sleep almost 40 people like you are. So it was very cool to hear that for me. And it still has stuck with me, 5 months later, whatever month we're in. So I thought that, I'm curious to hear more about how you have that mindset shift. And are there any other things that you use to help get you to that level outside of the mastermind?
Yeah. As far as the progression around that relationship to deals or numbers specifically, I don't know. There was some point a handful of years ago, even with, I think it was during my time in the automotive business, that I don't know if I can speak too clearly to that. Like, I'll have to go back and consider that more, like, where did that start? But to me, the equation is the equation, right? Like, there are some potentially complex elements that come up with larger deals, and the stakes can get higher, obviously, but the mechanics are very similar. And so pulling back the emotional processing of something like that, I think is wise. Like, not pulling the emotion out of every aspect of the business, but when it comes to processing the numbers on a deal, like, I think most of us know what cash on cash means. We know what some of these basic metrics are that are helpful tools within this industry. And so even for this property I'm sitting in now, it wasn't necessarily that we were even decided on Crystal Beach. It was, there was kind of a minimum purchase price and a minimum cash on cash. Here was the 2 main questions on the litmus test. And if it passed those, then you just approach it from that standpoint. And so, and it's not like, while this project may seem really, really, I mean, it is a cool project, but it's not, I'm not doing it because it looks a certain way. Like, it makes sense. Now it makes sense. Okay, cool. I'm going to have my heart fully into this thing. And I'm going to like approach this with full belief and faith that it's going to be like the best experience you can find on the Gulf. Right. But it started with that standpoint of, did it hit these particular boxes just from a metric standpoint? So as far as other mindset related pieces, one of the like superpowers for me in my own life has become just my reflection process and journaling. And I think elements like that, like how I relate to money, I am finding it's still in flux. It's still shifting. I feel it currently still in some kind of movement in the direction that I desire, but writing something like, it's natural for me to do $5 million deals. You write that enough times and you actually try to bring some emotion around it, it doesn't sound so weird anymore. Or you say, I usually, like, it might be journaling, Taylor Stays easily does 5 million in revenue every year, and our team is growing in ways that has international reach. Like, all of a sudden, like, these things begin to get into the mind. And it's something that I've learned a lot too from members in our mastermind as well. Like, how do I want to say this? One of the most important things I feel like for me in my life is the prioritization of me getting into the driver's seat of my process. Finding conscious agency daily, not just looking back on something and reflecting and seeing what you could have done differently. But it's like my constant goal is, how do I decrease the amount of time from like an observation that something needs to shift or grow, and the amount of time I actually take action on that? Is that a month from the point of some action? Is it a day later? Or is it in real time? I can see, oh, there's that pattern. There's that relationship to employees that still comes out from this previous business experience. I see that coming up, totally understandable because of this relational experience you had. But being able to shift those things in real time and have a level of conscious agency is something that is, I'm realizing how important that is for me in my process.
Anson, you just put on an absolute clinic when it comes to mindset, and I'm psyched that I got to be in the front seat of that classroom. Seriously, that was cool. I mean, I just got really fired up and was, even as you were speaking, was just doing some of my own reflection as I was listening to you, but that was super, super powerful. Yeah, just want to give it a minute.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah, if I could jump in there. I think I just attended a STR Women's virtual conference last week that Stacey St. John put on, and she closed out the conference on the third day, last keynote session, talking about mindset and a book that had totally changed her life. And she is, kicking ass and taking names a couple years into her short-term rental co-hosting and ownership business. And she had recommended the book Inner Size. And I actually am in the middle of it now, but I'm hearing a lot of the same elements that you just talked about. And I'm trying to absorb it and consume it and then practice it. And I think that's something that I'm learning as we're drinking from a fire hose, and a lot of different podcasts and the mastermind and books we read. Is I said to Dave, sometimes he'll send me, oh, there's another conference next week. And this, I said, I need time to absorb it, process it, and then start doing and applying it. I think you can have consumption overload. And I think that shutting off the education piece and then applying and just doing what you need to do for what you've already absorbed is so critical. So I'm excited to read more of this book, because I think it's that what you just gave us was a quick snapshot of those exact same sentiments and thought processes and ideals. And it was very cool to hear how it's worked out for you, and it has helped steer your business that has blossomed without you realizing that you were creating an STR business.
Right. Well, yeah. I'm trying to remember the exact definition that I heard, but there was an explanation given around success and how does one define success? And I might be butchering the actual quote, but it was something along the lines of, simply a person who does the thing they set out to do.
Right.
And that is like such a powerful framing to me, because the person that sets out to live a quiet life on a small property in the mountains and take care of their family, and if they achieve that, they are wildly more successful than the person that built the $200 million company and has lost everything along the way. But
Right.
bringing it ties back into what I was saying a minute ago, the consciousness piece with this. Like, I want to be eyes wide open, fully feeling, fully processing, and choosing my steps in this whole process, whether it's in the STR space, whether it's my marriage, like the kinds of circles and relationships and community that I engage with. My goal and desire is that the path I'm on are the steps that I take. And that doesn't mean I can absolutely micromanage and control every single element of my reality, but I can always choose my next step. And so like now, like we kind of joke about how I kind of found myself into building this STR business. Well, now that I'm in it, like it's a daily reflection at this point of, okay, what is my step now? And okay, how about now? And that's yeah, I feel like I'm just now moving beyond the kind of, I don't know, novice grinding of gears to get that flywheel started. And now I can like, okay, now it's in the system. Now it can be leveraged. Okay, what is the next step? So that's I get jazzed about that side of things for sure.
Oh man, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I think now we can get a little technical and I'd love to dive into the property that you're currently sitting in. So a little shift off the mindset, or actually maybe this is diving deeper into mindset actually. But I would love we'll do sort of the bigger pockets deal deep dive, but in all honesty, I would love to hear about the property you're in, what it means to you, your ideas and plans for the property. Take it away, man, because I think it's super exciting.
Yeah. So this property, as I mentioned, is in an area called Crystal Beach, Texas, which is a ferry ride over from Galveston. So you're sitting on the Gulf. And this particular property is quite a bit different than almost every other property in this market. I think this market kind of blew up a bit on the scene relative to the size of the actual area, the amount of actual units. Like it got a lot of publicity for being a pretty small town.
Right.
And I think, that came through a couple of other channels or podcasts or newsletters that are out there. And so a couple of years ago, there became a massive influx of investors into this market because of a relatively low price gem of a market sitting on the beach, in the Gulf, Texas. And so as a huge spike in investors in this market, some growth from a traveler guest standpoint, but the investor movement into this market has definitely outpaced the traveler growth and guest growth in this area. But the reason that, so even with looking at that, and you can see that with some of the different analytics and AirDNA and some of the tools that are out there. But what became really interesting about the property that I'm sitting in now is you have the 90% of the houses in this market are like the 3 to 4 bedrooms. And so now there are some ones that are going to perform well in that space. There's still going to be operators who do well because of design and their processes and the communication, all these things. But it is going to be a slog to stand out in that particular layout of a house. And there's a level of becoming a commodity that happens whenever you're one of another couple thousand of the same general property. So this property specifically is actually an 11-bedroom property that is shared between 2 houses that are connected by this deck. And So one house is 6 bedrooms, the other's 5. So it's 11 bed, 9 bath total. And so in that you have effectively, 2 kitchens between both those houses. And this space was run part-time as a rental for years, but far from being leveraged. So that was an interesting process, even from a lending perspective, because they wanted all the trailing numbers on this property that did not look good.
Right.
And so there was a lot of really wanted to make sure I'm seeing this equation clearly, because the numbers that were reported previously do not make sense for this property as an investment property. But I think a lot of that came down to elements like design. There's some legacy style management companies down here that have been here a long time that are good people. I don't know if all of them are run super well. I'll leave it at that. So I think that this was just a largely underperforming asset. And so coming into this space, we could have, in theory, just rolled with what was here. But to make it perform at a high level, we decided to actually do a pretty significant level of investing into this property. So we closed back in September, and we're just now getting on the very tail end of all the work that we've been doing here. And so that was been a complete redesign of the space, both from furnishings to paint to accent walls throughout the entire property. That actually Kristen Sjogren's team has helped me with this, and it's been
awesome.
And there was a 3-car garage that we've converted, fully finished, into 2 bays of it is think of classy, swanky billiards hall.
Nice.
Museum style, art lights on the walls. And we just had a pool table just came in, an old school arcade system, and dart boards, really low light. It really has got a nice vibe going on. And then 1 bay is a workout studio with bike and row machines, and just got the punching bag installed today. And it's just some fun elements like that. So
can I ask a quick question? Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
How much fun was it? Maybe it wasn't fun, but hopefully it was. How much fun was it to be able to have the opportunity to create all of this experiential, stuff? How fun was that?
Oh, it's incredible. And again, if this feels very different than a lot of the other units that
Right.
I've been involved with, that are beautiful spaces and create amazing memories. But even today, I'm looking at the section of wall and I'm like, oh man, the space needs a guitar. And I'm envisioning there's we have a couple, there's a wood burning fire pit and a gas fire pit, 2 different areas of the property. And I'm like, the space needs a guitar, it needs a djembe. And I'm painting that experience in my own mind, and I'm getting super excited about the memories that are going to be made here for other people.
Right.
And I'm like, so you think about all these different spaces and and what can be generated, and then starting to fill those in. And now you're starting to think of from a photography standpoint, how do we capture this? And talking to videographers, I have some pretty, I'm excited about this videographer that I'm talking with, and creating some very cinematic storyline style videos for us to be able to use from a direct booking advertising standpoint on this space. Because this space is going to go well beyond just being a standard rental. So
I love that you were differentiating by the size, because you said there's a lot of 3 and 4 bedrooms, and you have one that can fit such big parties, which is very cool. And then also the design and experiential investments, like you said. So I think that I know we're taught to figure out how we're going to stand out, how we're going to have those scroll stopping images, or what amenities or size of the property is going to make it stand out among the very saturated market. So it's so cool to hear how you did that in 2 ways. It's going bigger and scarier, but also stepping out of your comfort zone and just killing it with all of these things. So I can't wait to see that video footage and all these other things come to fruition.
Yeah. And I'm finding how significant it is that your own heart buys into it. Right. not only does it make the work process of it easier, and it helps with, I think, longevity of us in our own industry. Like if we're not,
Right.
at times this can be a lot of work. Dispelling the myth of it being a passive investment, right? Like it can be a lot of work at moments. But getting the investment of my own heart into this space, even with some major hiccups while I've been out here, the picture in my mind of someone playing guitar with their kids by the fire, honestly, it's fuel in the tank.
Right.
Like it gets me jazzed. Like I will wake up tomorrow morning legitimately feeling excited about the space we're going to make, the stories they're going to make with their families for years to come. Like I'm all about it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And I think it comes. Oh,
sorry.
Dave, go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, one thing that I've had a much better internal read on for me over the last several weeks is if something energizes me or drains me, whether it's an activity or spending time with a person or a client or just whatever. And it's clear that, this energizes me hearing you saying it. So I'm imagining that it's quite energizing for you as well, which you need that. It helps to support your why, like we were talking about.
Well, and to maybe touch back in or come full circle in the mindset piece. There's also been moments during my trip out here that have had significant challenges, that it's also a very conscious, willful act to bring my mind and even my imagination, opening myself up emotionally to tap into that side where like I kind of got run in circles with one contractor, and like one aspect of the project, I'm having to kind of cut ties on there and like and pivot a bit. And maybe I'm the only one out there like this, but I can ruminate on something like that.
Yeah.
And I can get a lot of mileage out of my mind going in circles over what I should do differently. Why, and it doesn't serve anything.
Right.
And so for me, it's such a helpful skill that I feel developing, and still I can grow in more, is like, no, what I'm going to focus on is like, where exactly should the coffee pot go whenever someone comes down the stairs, that it feels most natural that they can start their morning in a good way? Where should the guitar be placed? Because I can, like, being able to come back to those and dialing into that emotional experience with the experience, like the moments you're going to create, like that deserves more of the focus than like dealing with the contractor who's toying with me.
Right. Right.
Yeah, Dave and I dealt with something last week with vendors. We won't get into the details, but he said, she said, and someone got heated with us, and it really bothered us for a few days. And I think bringing it back to your why and the positive aspects of short-term rentals and the experiences you're teeing up for people, it really helps with that. And I think it comes full circle back to your name that you chose for your company and the tailored stays. I like it for two reasons. One, it goes back to that North Star you were talking about with that personal element and touch, with even from your carriage house all the way to a plane ride away for you. And then also I think of tailored as I'm even going to my tailor tomorrow, and think of customized, personalized touch, and very formulative for that person and that group and that experience, and that vision of someone playing the guitar with their kids by the fire. I can see that, I can feel that, I can sense all of that, and I think that's incredible. And I think that it's so cool to see all these elements dovetail together in your business, and you're continuing to carry that essence of your company, your business, and you as the CEO of your business forward with how you approach this massive project, which I'm sure has a lot of headaches, but a lot of bright spots as well.
100%.
It's amazing. Well, we've definitely stolen a good chunk of your time. As we start to round this out, any final sort of parting thoughts or words for our listeners? I know we kind of dropped that on you. We didn't prep you with that one, but
what I would say is, in a space that is understandably and rightfully very focused on a lot of metrics, focused on occupancy rates and revenue numbers and cash on cash, all these different components that are absolutely essential if there's going to be longevity for any business in this industry. Growing to develop the ear for your own heart and intuition, like going all the way around on that end, dialing into things like your why. Like I didn't really get it until a handful, like this past year. I was like, okay, and now my why, I've go. And but it's taken a lot of intentional effort to be able to access that side of myself.
Right.
And that side of things cannot get enough airtime. Like it's worth it, not only from the kind of businesses that I think that we'll make if we're actually tapped into that, but also just like what kind of life do I want to lead? You know, like what is the story like? And what is the story I want to pass to my kids? Like, not that dad just built this business and he did like, but like how I did it, how I like allowed myself to feel, how I prioritized the way I made other people feel in the process. So tapping into those softer sides of this industry, because I remember who said it, but this is as much, if not more, about hospitality than it is real estate, specifically in the short-term rental side, which is honestly, it's empathy. For me, at the end of the day, it's empathy, and you're seeing the humanity of other people and their needs and desires. And so being able to honor yourself with your own needs and desires, being able to see it in others, and then being able to have creative solutions to that. I'd love to see more and more of that being on the table as far as conversation within our industry. So I'll leave it at that.
That was amazing. That is that's some mic drop stuff right there. And honestly, Anson, thanks so much for joining us on the show. It was an absolute pleasure to have you on and really get to dive into all this. I mean, this was even deeper than, Miami. It was like a second layer of it, and just so appreciative to have you on the show. Kim, great work, and signing off.
Thanks, guys.
This podcast is brought to you by the 5-Star Co-host, an Airbnb management and consulting company that helps homeowners turn their properties into passive income streams through short-term rentals. Do you want to turn your vacation house into a passive income stream? Then look no further. The 5-Star Co-host has served over 1,000 guests in several Airbnb properties and in varying markets. The STR Co-host, or the 5-Star Co-host, is at the vanguard of the short-term rental industry by leveraging technology and systems to maximize the guest experience while achieving high revenue for owners. Get a free home analysis by emailing the 5-Star Co-host at gmail.com. That's the 5-Star Co-host at gmail.com. THEFIVESTARCOHOST at gmail.com.